So is Furiosa better than its predecessor, Mad Max Fury Road? Honestly, you could make an argument that it is, and I will answer that question at the end of this video and tell you which one I think is better. But for now, let's talk about this movie. Now, this video will be spoiler free, but if you do want to see what I gave this movie out of 10, head over to my shorts, TikTok, or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. This movie is directed by George Miller, and it gives us an origin story for the character of Furiosa. And in this movie, she is played by Anya Taylor-Joy, and when she is stolen from her home, Furiosa fights to get back home through the wasteland while also getting revenge on those who took her from her home. Jumping right into the good, and the first thing I have here is both Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth. And starting off with Anya Taylor-Joy, I think this may be one of my favorite performances from her. Having to follow up Charlize Theron is not an easy thing to do, and she did a really good job at it. And there was even a point towards the end of this movie where she spoke and we didn't see her face, and she sounded exactly like Charlize. She was the star of the show, and she did a good job at showing us Furiosa's journey throughout this film. She very much started out as this innocent but very smart little girl who has now been hardened by the things that she has seen in the wasteland and become the Furiosa that we know today. So in a lot of this movie, especially in the scenes where she was older, she showed no emotion and was really just a stone cold killer in this thing, and was absolutely awesome in all of the action scenes. And one of the things I really liked about this film and her journey in this film is that with each scene that she was in, we saw her get just one step closer to the Furiosa that we know today. Now, moving on to Chris Hemsworth, he was just an absolute blast to watch as the villain in this thing. He was menacing and brutal from the very beginning of this movie, and while doing all of that, somehow his character was also just so unserious, which added a little bit of humor to this thing as well. But even with his character being so unserious, he was still pretty scary because they established early on in this movie that he was not afraid to hurt or kill to get what he wants. So yeah, Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth were a lot of fun to watch in this movie, and they did a great job. Next up for the good, I have the action, and for me, the action was the best part of the movie. I mean, it was on par, if not better, with the action that we got in Fury Road. And just the sheer scale and size of some of these action sequences were just amazing. It really felt like they took what we got in Fury Road and just said, okay, how can we make this bigger and better in every way? I mean, these action scenes literally had everything. From people jumping off motorcycles, cars, and trucks to literal people flying through the air in parachutes and attacking other people. It was just awesome to watch, and it was super chaotic, but I loved every second of it. These action scenes also helped tell the story, which I thought was really cool because it added purpose to each sequence that we got. It didn't feel like they were just making action scenes for the sake of making action scenes because this was an action movie. And on top of that, these scenes added so much intensity to this film, and when you pair that with the score and the music, which was just amazing in this film, if I do say so myself, you just get a dang near perfect result. And finally, for the good, I have the story. Now, this is one aspect of the movie that I think they did a lot better in this movie than they did in Fury Road. This was essentially a revenge / coming of age story for Furiosa, and this story had a lot more emotion in it, and in turn, that made it feel a lot more personal, and I liked that. In this, we see Furiosa very much come into her own as she just tries to survive the wasteland and return home. And on a side note, another good thing I thought this movie did was showing that all the characters we saw in this were very much products of the wasteland, as they were all just trying to do what they had to do to survive out there. And as we finish this movie and get to the end of this thing, we see that the wasteland played a very big role in Furiosa becoming the character that we know today. It was also really cool to see some of the scenes that were mentioned in Fury Road play out in this film. Now, this film was told in chapters, and I can honestly say that there were no moments in this movie that I felt disengaged with the story. And this all led to a scene between Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth that, in my opinion, is one of the best scenes in the movie and really ended this thing in a poetic way. Moving on to the so-so, and the first thing I have here is that given that this movie is a prequel, there is really no suspense in it because you knew where Furiosa was gonna end up at the end of this thing. Now, this movie opens up with Furiosa being taken from her home, and don't get me wrong, the chase scene following that is absolutely awesome, but given that we know that she doesn't really return home until the events of Fury Road, it kind of takes all the suspense out out of that chase scene, and you're kind of just sitting there like, well, I know they're not going to return her back home, so I feel like I'm just kind of sitting here to figure out why she never got back home. And I know technically there's really nothing the movie can do about that, because there were a couple of other scenes that were definitely spoiled by the events of Fury Road, because we knew exactly what was going to happen because we had seen the movie that is set after this one. So while I was watching this movie, I was very much thinking, well, if this happened in Fury Road, then this definitely has to happen in this movie, and it was just a matter of when that certain event would happen. And when we did get to those moments, whether it was Furiosa losing her arm or not being brought back to her home, I was less shocked than I would have been if this movie would have came out before Fury Road. Now, at the end of the day, it didn't lessen my experience with this movie, but it did take a little bit of that suspense and mystery away from this thing. And finally, getting into the bad, and the only thing I have here is that the CGI and special effects were a little bit shaky at times during this film. Now, overall, the visuals in this were pretty good, but there were a couple of shots in this thing where you definitely noticed the CGI, and it probably could have been cleaned up just a little bit. More specifically, on the shots that they maybe used a green screen or some type of digital background, there were a few times where I was like, okay, that shot doesn't look quite right and doesn't really look like all the others that we've gotten. Also, during some of the action scenes, you could definitely see where they relied on CGI a little bit more. Now, I wouldn't say this made me dislike those parts of the movie, but I would say it definitely pulled me out of those scenes when I was watching them. So now, with all that said, it's time to answer the question from the beginning, and that is Furiosa better than Fury Road? For me, I prefer Fury Road over this one, but overall, this is still a great movie. The action is what makes this thing so enjoyable, but the story and the performances by Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth added some depth to this film. And as of right now, this is one of my favorites of the year and is a must-watch. Those are my thoughts on Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.